The sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, beating down on the endless expanse of prairie grass that stretched to the horizon. Young Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, squinting against the harsh glare as he guided his horse through the rolling terrain. At 22, he was still green enough to be called a tenderfoot by the older hands, but he carried himself with the stubborn pride of youth determined to prove its worth. He'd left the small town of Cedar Creek 3 days ago, hired on to help drive cattle to the northern pastures. But a spooked horse in a sudden thunderstorm had separated him from the crew, and now he found himself alone in territory he'd been warned about since childhood. Apache land. The elders in town had filled his head with tales of savage raids and merciless warriors who could appear and disappear like ghosts in the desert. Jake tried to push these stories from his mind, but every shadow cast by the towering mesas made his hand drift to the Colt .45 at his hip. He'd never killed a man, never even drawn on one. But out here the weight of the gun felt like his only friend. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Belle, picked her way carefully through the rocky terrain. They'd been climbing steadily since noon, following what Jake hoped was a trail that would lead them back to familiar territory. But with each passing hour, the landscape grew more foreign, more forbidding. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like ancient sentinels, and deep canyons cut through the land like scars. "Easy, girl," Jake murmured to Belle as she snorted nervously. The mare's ears swiveled constantly, alert to dangers her rider couldn't perceive. Animals always knew. His father had told him once, "Trust your horse more than your eyes." The memory of his father brought a familiar ache. Thomas Morrison had been a hard man, made harder by the loss of his wife when Jake was just 7. He'd raised his son with rough hands and few words, teaching him to rope and ride but little about the gentler aspects of life. Jake had left home partly to escape that suffocating silence, partly to find his own way in the world. Now, lost in hostile territory, he wished he'd paid more attention to the old man's lessons about reading the land. The afternoon wore on, and Jake's water was running low. He'd rationed it carefully, but the desert heat sucked moisture from a man faster than he could replace it. His lips were cracked, his throat parched. Belle needed water too. Her sides were dark with sweat, and her breathing had grown labored. Then he saw it, a line of green snaking through a valley below. Cottonwoods and willows, the sure sign of water. Jake's heart lifted, but caution tempered his relief. Water meant life in the desert, but it also meant a gathering place for both animals and men. Still, he had no choice. Without water, neither he nor Belle would last another day. He guided the mare down a narrow deer trail, loose rocks skittering beneath her hooves. The temperature dropped as they descended into the shade of the canyon walls. It was cooler here, but the shadows seemed to press in on all sides. Jake's neck prickled with the sensation of being watched, though he saw nothing but rock and scraggly vegetation. The trail led to a small spring-fed pool, crystal clear and inviting. Jake dismounted, his legs stiff from hours in the saddle. He let Belle drink first, keeping his hand on his pistol and his eyes scanning the canyon walls. The silence was complete except for the gentle splash of water and Belle's grateful drinking. That's when he noticed the signs. Hoof prints in the soft mud. Not shod like his mares, but unshod ponies. Apache. The tracks were fresh, no more than a few hours old. Jake's mouth went dry despite his desperate thirst. He should leave, mount up and ride hard back the way he'd come. But Belle needed rest, and he needed water. He knelt by the pool, cupping the cool water in his hands and drinking deeply. It tasted of minerals and earth, but it was the sweetest thing he'd ever known. He splashed some on his face and neck, feeling almost human again. The sky had begun to change while he was focused on the water. What had been clear blue was now massing with dark clouds on the western horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and electricity. Jake knew that smell. A storm was coming, and, from the looks of it, a big one. Desert storms were notorious for their violence. Flash floods could turn a dry wash into a raging torrent in minutes. Lightning struck with deadly accuracy on the high ground. And the rain, when it came, fell in sheets that could blind a man and turn solid ground into treacherous mud. Jake looked around desperately for shelter. The canyon walls offered some protection, but not enough. Then he spotted it, a narrow cleft in the rock face, barely visible behind a screen of thorny mesquite. It looked deep enough to shelter both him and Belle from the worst of the storm. He led the mare toward the opening, having to push through the grabbing thorns that tore at his shirt. The space beyond was larger than it appeared, a natural cave carved by centuries of wind and water. It was dim inside, but dry, with a sandy floor that showed no signs of flooding. Jake had just begun to unsaddle Belle when the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy. Within moments, the drops became a deluge. Lightning cracked across the sky, so bright it hurt to look at, followed immediately by thunder that shook the ground. Belle whinnied nervously, and Jake soothed her with gentle words and touches. He was a stranger in a strange land, trapped by the fury of nature in a cave that might shelter Apache warriors or mountain lions. The storm raged outside, turning the world into a chaos of water and wind. Jake checked his pistol for the 10th time, made sure his rifle was within reach, and settled down to wait. As night began to fall, the temperature plummeted. What had been oppressive heat became bitter cold. Jake pulled his bedroll from his saddlebags, wrapping it around his shoulders. He didn't dare light a fire. The smoke might draw unwanted attention. So he sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the storm and fighting the fear that crept up his spine like a cold hand. He thought of Cedar Creek, of the saloon where the other cowboys would be drinking whiskey and swapping lies. He thought of Mary Patterson, the banker's daughter who'd smiled at him last Sunday after church. He'd been working up the courage to ask her to the summer dance. Now he wondered if he'd ever see her again. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it grew more violent as full darkness fell. Water began to seep into the cave entrance, and Jake moved deeper inside, pulling Belle with him. It was then, in a flash of lightning that illuminated the cave like daylight, that he realized he wasn't alone. In that brief, blinding moment of lightning, Jake's heart nearly stopped. There, pressed against the far wall of the cave, stood a figure draped in shadow. His hand flew to his pistol, but before he could draw, another flash revealed what the darkness had hidden. A woman. She wore a dress of soft doeskin, decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the intermittent light like tiny stars. Her long black hair fell loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, dark and wide with alarm, fixed on him with the intensity of a cornered wildcat. She was Apache, no doubt about it, but younger than he'd expected, perhaps no more than 20 summers. They stood frozen, each assessing the other across the cave's sandy floor. Jake's hand remained on his pistol grip. Though he didn't draw, the woman held a skinning knife, its blade catching the lightning's glare. Belle snorted nervously between them, sensing the tension that crackled through the air more palpably than the storm outside. "Easy," Jake said, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the woman, his horse, or himself. His voice sounded strange in the confined space, competing with the rain's roar. The woman's grip on her knife tightened, but she didn't advance. When she spoke, her English was accented but clear. "You leave. This my place." Jake swallowed hard. Outside, the storm had become a monster. Sheets of rain so thick he could no longer see the canyon wall opposite the cave entrance. "Can't do that. Miss, storm's too bad." "I'll stay on my side. You stay on yours." Her laugh was bitter, without humor. "White man's promise. Worth nothing." The contempt in her voice stung more than Jake expected. He slowly removed his hand from his pistol, holding both palms up in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. "I ain't looking for trouble. Just shelter from the storm, same as you." She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing her options. The cave was large enough for both of them, but trust was another matter. Finally, she lowered her knife slightly, though she kept it ready. "You stay there. Come close. I cut you." Jake nodded, moving to the opposite side of the cave with Belle. He could feel the woman's eyes on him as he settled his horse. checking her hooves and rubbing her down with a piece of burlap from his saddlebags. The familiar routine calmed his nerves somewhat. "What's your name?" he asked, not looking at her directly. Silence stretched between them before she answered. "Sarah, my white name, Sarah." It seemed wrong somehow, that American name on her lips. "And your real name?" This time the pause was longer. "Ayana, means eternal blossom." The bitterness crept back into her voice. Stupid name for stupid girl who believed lies. Jake risked a glance at her. In the sporadic lightning, he could see she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and a proud bearing despite her evident distress. But there was something broken in her eyes, a hurt that went deeper than fear of a stranger. "I'm Jake Morrison," he offered, "from Cedar Creek." "I know Cedar Creek," she said, and there was something dark in the knowing. "Your people there kill my cousin, say he steal horse. He never steal nothing." Jake felt the familiar weight of guilt that came with being part of a world that dealt so harshly with her people. He'd heard the story. A young Apache hanged last spring. The evidence had been thin, but the town's mind was made up before the trial began. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Sorry." She repeated the word like it was foreign. White men always sorry after. She shifted position, and he noticed she favored her left side, moving stiffly. "You hurt?" Her hand moved protectively to her ribs. "Not your concern. White man." They lapsed into silence, the storm providing a constant backdrop of noise. Jake pulled out his meager supplies, hardtack, jerky, and a can of peaches he'd been saving. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning. He glanced at Sarah, who sat rigid against the wall, and made a decision. "You hungry? Got food to share." She looked at him suspiciously. "Why you share?" Jake shrugged. "My ma always said a meal tastes better with company, even if the company wants to stick a knife in you." He attempted a smile. For the first time, her stern expression cracked slightly. "Your mother, she dead. Long time ago, when I was young. My mother too. Soldiers come to camp. She try protect children." Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She not fast enough." The weight of her words settled over Jake like a blanket. He'd heard stories of cavalry raids on Apache camps, but they'd always been distant, abstract things. Sitting across from this woman, seeing the pain etched in her face, made it real in a way that shamed him. He opened the can of peaches with his knife, setting it between them like a peace offering. "Peaches might help. Sweet things sometimes do." Sarah stared at the can for a long moment before reaching out. Her fingers were elegant. Jake noticed, despite the calluses of hard living. She took a piece of fruit, eating it slowly, savoring the sweetness. "Why you alone?" she asked eventually. "Cowboys always travel like pack of wolves. Got separated from my outfit. Storm spooked my horse." He didn't mention it had been a different storm, days ago. "What about you? Why are you here alone?" Her face hardened again. "Not alone by choice. Am wife. Was wife." She corrected herself, and the distinction seemed to pain her. Jake waited, sensing there was more to the story. The storm continued its assault outside, and water was now flowing steadily past the cave entrance, turning the canyon floor into a river. "My father, he make agreement with Yellow Horse clan. I marry their son, make peace between families. But his family." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They not want Apache woman who speak white man's words, who learn from mission school, say I'm corrupted, say I bring bad spirits. So they cast you out? Worse, they leave me for dead after." She didn't finish, her hand moving again to her ribs. "I am nothing now. Not Apache, not white, just ghost walking between worlds." Jake felt a surge of anger on her behalf. Among his people, marriage was supposed to be sacred, protective. That ain't right. A man should protect his wife, not, "You know nothing. Jake Morrison." She cut him off sharply. "Your people make rules. Break them when convenient. My people same. Everyone same." The bitterness in her voice could have curdled milk. He wanted to argue, to say he was different. But what proof did he have? He was just another white man in her territory, carrying guns and assumptions in equal measure. Maybe you're right, he admitted. But I know what it's like to not fit anywhere. Too young for the old-timers to take serious. Too poor for the town folks to respect. Always trying to prove I'm man enough, tough enough, good enough. He gave a rueful laugh. Ain't worked so far. Sarah studied him with those dark eyes, seeming to really see him for the first time. You just boy playing at being man? The words should have stung, but there was no real malice in them. Just observation. Yeah, probably, but we all got to grow up sometime. Growing up means learning world is cruel. Learning trust kills you faster than bullet. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. Jake noticed she was shivering. The desert night had turned cold, and her dress, while beautiful, offered little protection. Without thinking, he pulled his bedroll free and held it out to her. You'll catch your death. She looked at the blanket like it might be a trap. What you want for it? Nothing, just, it's cold. She hesitated so long, Jake's arm began to ache from holding it out. Finally, she snatched it from him, wrapping it around her shoulders with practiced efficiency. This changes nothing. Still cut you if you come close. Understood. Jake leaned back against the cave wall, trying to get comfortable on the sandy floor. Belle had settled, dozing despite the storm. He envied the horse's ability to find peace in chaos. The lightning was less frequent now, but the rain continued its relentless assault. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, answered by another, then another, until the night was filled with their eerie chorus. They sing for the rain, Sarah said softly. Thank the spirits for bringing life to desert. Always sounded lonely to me. Jake admitted, everything lonely. Jake Morrison, but coyote. He accepted, not fight what is. She pulled the blanket tighter. White men never accept. Always try change everything. Jake thought about that, about the relentless push westward. The town springing up where there had been only earth and sky. His own part in it, small as it was. Maybe that's our curse. Never satisfied with what we got. Not curse, choice. Sarah's voice was growing drowsy despite her wariness. Always choice. The storm began to quiet as the night wore on, though rain still fell steadily outside the cave. Jake had dozed fitfully, jerking awake each time Belle shifted or the wind howled particularly loud. Across from him, Sarah sat wrapped in his blanket, her dark eyes reflecting the occasional lightning flash. Neither fully trusted sleep in the other's presence. You know what the old women of my tribe say? Sarah's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. They say a young cowboy was trapped with an Apache bride. That night made him a man. She laughed, but it was a sound without joy. They tell this to frighten girls before wedding night, or maybe to frighten boys. I never know which. Jake felt heat rise to his face, grateful for the darkness that hid it. That's supposed to be about us? No, old story, from before my mother's time. But tonight, she gestured vaguely at their situation. Tonight feels like story coming alive, except you still just boy. And I am nobody's bride now. The bitterness in her voice made Jake's chest tight. He wanted to say something comforting, but what comfort could he offer? He was indeed just a boy playing at being a man, lost in territory he didn't understand, sitting across from a woman whose pain he could barely comprehend. Tell me about the mission school, he said instead, hoping to lead her thoughts elsewhere. Sarah's posture shifted slightly. Father Francisco's school, near Fort Grant. They take Apache children, teach us English, teach us your God, teach us to be ashamed of Apache ways. She paused. I was good student, too good. Learned to read, write, speak like white woman. Thought it'd make me special, make me valuable. Isn't learning good? Learning is power, but power without place to use it? She shook her head. White world not want Apache girl who can read. Apache world not want girl who forget old ways. I become nothing to everyone. Jake thought about his own schooling, cut short when his mother died. His father had seen no use for books when there was work to be done. Maybe being between worlds ain't all bad. Means you can see both clear. Clear sight brings clear pain. Sarah shifted, wincing as she moved. You see too much. Understand why hate exists. Harder to pick side when you understand both. You really believe that? That we gotta pick sides? She looked at him like he was simple. You think we sit here as friends? No, we sit here as two people with nowhere else to go. When storm ends, we become Apache and white man again. Natural enemies. I ain't your enemy, Jake protested. No, your people not kill my people. Not take land, break treaties, poison water holes. Her voice rose slightly, then dropped again. You maybe not pull trigger, Jake Morrison, but you benefit from those who do. That make you enemy by birth. Jake wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat. He thought of his father's small ranch, built on what had once been hunting grounds. The cattle they raised grazing where buffalo once roamed. He'd never thought of it as theft before, just progress. But sitting here with Sarah, seeing it through her eyes, made him question everything he'd taken for granted. I'm sorry, he said finally, knowing how inadequate the words were. Always sorry, she murmured, echoing her earlier words. Then, surprisingly, her tone softened. But you first white man to say it like you mean it. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. Jake's stomach growled again, and he pulled out the jerky, offering some to Sarah. This time she took it without hesitation, chewing slowly. Why were you really out here alone? She asked. Truth this time. Jake was surprised she'd sensed his earlier evasion. Got in a fight with one of the older hands. He said I was too soft, too green, said I'd never make it as a real cowboy. He laughed self-consciously. Guess I wanted to prove him wrong. Thought if I could bring the strays in by myself, show I didn't need help. Pride, Sarah said simply, makes fools of everyone. What about you? There's more to your story than a bad marriage. Sarah was quiet for so long, Jake thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Yellow Horse's son. He wants son, strong Apache son. But I give him daughter, small, weak daughter who die before moon is full. He say I cursed, that mission school poisoned my womb. His mother agree. She trailed off, hand moving to her ribs again. They hurt you? It wasn't a question. They try to fix me, old way, with fists and curses and, she shuddered. When that not work, they take me to desert, say spirits will judge. If I worthy, I survive. If not, she shrugged. Jake felt rage building in his chest. Among his people, whatever their faults, a man who struck a woman was considered the lowest kind of coward. That ain't right. That ain't any kind of right. Right, wrong white man's words. Apache have different words. Duty, honor, shame. She looked at him directly. You know shame, Jake Morrison? He thought about it, about all the times he'd felt less than others. Yeah, I know shame. Then you understand. Shame worse than death. Death ends. Shame follows like shadow. Jake moved without thinking, sliding across the cave floor until he was sitting closer to her, though still at what he hoped was a respectful distance. Sarah tensed, hand moving to her knife. I ain't gonna hurt you, he said softly. Just, nobody should carry that alone. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly relaxed her grip on the knife. You strange white man. Jake Morrison. My ma used to say I was too soft-hearted for my own good. He smiled at the memory, said it would get me in trouble one day. Your mother was wise woman. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Soft hearts break easy in hard world. Maybe, but they also feel more, see more. He gestured vaguely. Like right now, another man might just see an enemy. I see a woman who's been hurt bad and is still fighting. Fighting for what? I have no people, no place, no purpose. The despair in her voice was heartbreaking. You're still here, still breathing. That's something. Sarah made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Apache are hard to kill, even broken ones. The rain was finally beginning to slacken. Jake noticed. The constant roar had diminished to a steady patter. Soon the storm would pass, and they'd have to face whatever came next. "What will you do when the storm ends?" he asked. "Walk. Until I can't walk more." She said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. "That's no kind of plan. What else is there? Cannot go back to Yellow Horse Clan, cannot go to White Town. Other Apache bands will not take woman with shame, so I walk." Jake's mind raced. There had to be another option. Something besides wandering until death claimed her. "There's settlements to the south, Mexican towns where Apache woman is worth less than horse, where men think woman alone is invitation." She shook her head. "You young, Jake Morrison, you not understand how world treats woman with no protection." He fell silent, recognizing the truth in her words. He'd seen how even white women were treated when they lacked male protection, the assumptions made, the liberties taken. For an Apache woman, it would be infinitely worse. "You could," he started, then stopped, the idea seeming too forward, too presumptuous. "Could what?" There was a sharpness to her voice, a challenge. "Travel with me, just until we reach somewhere safe. 2 people are safer than 1 out here." Sarah looked at him like he'd suggested they fly to the moon. "Travel with white man? You know what your people say about Apache woman who goes with white man?" "I know what they say doesn't matter if it keeps you alive." Easy words from someone who never been called those names. But something in her expression had shifted. A tiny crack in her armor of despair. Jake pressed on, surprising himself with his urgency. "I ain't saying it would be easy, but it's better than walking until you can't walk anymore. And maybe we could find somewhere neither of us has to be what others expect. No such place exists. Maybe not, but wouldn't it be worth looking?" Sarah studied him in the dim light, and Jake could almost see her thoughts churning. Trust had nearly killed her once already, but the alternative was a slow death in the desert, alone and forgotten. "You just boy," she said finally. "What makes you think you can protect anyone?" Jake thought about it seriously. She was right. He was young, inexperienced, out of his depth. But something had changed in him during this long night. Some understanding that hadn't been there before. "Maybe being a man ain't about being the toughest or the strongest," he said slowly. "Maybe it's about standing by someone when the whole world says you shouldn't." Sarah's eyes glistened in the darkness, though whether with tears or trick of light, Jake couldn't tell. "Pretty words, Jake Morrison. But sun will rise, and pretty words fade in daylight. Then I guess we'll see what kind of man I am come morning." The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving only the sound of dripping water and the distant rush of runoff through the canyon. Somewhere outside, an owl called, receiving an answer from its mate. The night was ending. Jake realized. Soon they'd have to leave this strange sanctuary and face the world beyond. "Rest," Sarah said unexpectedly. "I keep watch. I don't need—" "Rest," she repeated more firmly. "Long walk tomorrow, whatever direction we choose." The way she said "we" made Jake's heart lift slightly. It wasn't agreement, not yet, but it wasn't rejection either. He settled back against the cave wall, exhaustion finally overtaking wariness. "Sarah?" he said as sleep began to claim him. "What?" "Your real name, Ayanna. It's beautiful. Suits you better than Sarah." He thought he heard her breath catch, but sleep pulled him under before he could be sure. Jake woke to find pale dawn light filtering into the cave. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then the events of the night came rushing back. He sat up quickly, heart racing, to find Ayanna still there, sitting exactly where he'd left her, his blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was watching the cave entrance with the stillness of someone who'd kept vigil all night. "You didn't sleep," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Apache women learn to go without sleep when danger is near." She turned to look at him, and in the growing light he could see the exhaustion etched on her face, along with something else, bruises along her jawline, fading to yellow and green. The sight made his stomach turn. He'd suspected, but seeing the evidence of violence made it real. "How long ago?" he asked quietly. She knew what he meant. 7 days, maybe 8. Hard to remember when each day is about not dying. Jake stood, stretching muscles stiff from sleeping on stone. Belle nickered softly, eager for breakfast and water. Outside, the world had been transformed by the storm. The dusty canyon floor was now a muddy stream. Though already beginning to recede, the air smelled clean and sharp, filled with the scent of wet sage and creosote. "We should move," Ayanna said. "Water brings all creatures, some with 2 legs." Jake knew she was right. Waterholes would draw everyone. Travelers, Apache bands, outlaws. He began saddling Belle while Ayanna watched from the cave entrance. His blanket still around her shoulders, making her look smaller, more vulnerable than she had in the darkness. "You can ride," he offered. "I'll walk alongside." She shook her head. "Apache woman walks, makes us strong. You're hurt and exhausted. Strength ain't always about suffering." She gave him that look again, like he was a child speaking of adult matters. But there was less edge to it now. "Your horse not like Apache rider anyway." As if to prove her wrong, Belle stretched her neck toward Ayanna, nostrils flaring as she took in the woman's scent. Ayanna stood perfectly still, then slowly extended her hand. Belle lipped at her palm gently. "Traitor," Jake muttered to his horse, but he was secretly pleased. Belle had always been a good judge of character. They left the cave as the sun climbed higher, turning the wet rocks to gold. Jake led Belle while Ayanna walked beside them, moving with a grace that belied her injuries. She'd returned his blanket, folded with military precision, but he'd insisted she keep it. The morning was still cool, and her doe-skin dress, while practical, wasn't meant for the temperature swings of the high desert. They walked in companionable silence for a while, following the canyon as it wound through the landscape. Jake found himself stealing glances at Ayanna, noting how she moved through the terrain like water, leaving barely a trace while he stumbled over rocks and scraped against thorns. "You make much noise," she observed. "Like whole cavalry regiment, never claimed to be quiet." Jake replied, then yelped as a particularly vicious thorn caught his arm. For the first time, he saw her almost smile, just a slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. But it transformed her face. "Come, I show you." She moved closer, demonstrating how to place his feet, how to move with the landscape rather than through it. Her hands were gentle as she adjusted his posture, but Jake was acutely aware of her nearness, the way sunlight caught in her hair. "Better," she said, stepping back. "Still loud, but better." They continued on, and Jake tried to implement what she'd shown him. He was clumsy at first, but gradually began to find a rhythm. The sun climbed higher, and the desert began to steam as moisture evaporated. Soon it would be hot again. The storm nothing but a memory and rapidly drying mud. "Why you really want to help me?" Ayanna asked suddenly. "Truth now, not pretty words from last night." Jake considered his answer carefully. "Maybe because I know what it's like to not belong. Maybe because leaving you to die would make me no better than the men who hurt you. Or maybe..." He paused, searching for honesty. "Maybe because you're the first person in a long time to see me as I really am, not what I'm pretending to be." "I see, frightened boy trying to be brave," she said simply. "That about sums it up." He laughed self-consciously. "Not very impressive, is it? Fear is not shame. Fear keeps us alive. Is acting despite fear that makes strength." She touched her ribs gingerly. "I was frightened when they beat me, still frightened now, but still walking." They stopped at midday to rest in the shade of a large boulder. Jake shared his remaining food while Ayanna showed him which plants were safe to eat, pointing out the small details that distinguished food from poison. She moved carefully. He noticed, protecting her injured side. "Let me look," he said finally. "My ma taught me some healing before she died." Ayanna tensed. "Is nothing. Is something, or you wouldn't keep favoring it. I got some laudanum in my saddlebags. And no. The word was sharp, final. No white man's medicine. Makes mind cloudy, spirit weak. Then at least let me see if anything's broken. Can't help you if you collapse on me. She studied him for a long moment, then slowly lifted the side of her dress just enough to reveal the bruising along her ribs. Jake sucked in a breath. The entire left side of her torso was a mottled canvas of purple, black, and yellow. Jesus, he whispered. Your God had nothing to do with this, she said, lowering her dress. Jake's hands clenched into fists. I ever meet this Yellow Horse clan? You do nothing. This not your fight, not your shame to avenge. She looked at him seriously. Promise me, Jake Morrison, you meet Yellow Horse people, you walk away. Promise. I can't just promise. Her voice was iron. Or I leave now. Take my chances alone. Jake could see she meant it. All right, I promise. But it ain't right. Many things not right. We still must live with them. She stood, ready to continue despite the obvious pain movement caused her. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The high canyon country gave way to lower elevations, with more vegetation and signs of human passage. They found a well-traveled trail that Jake recognized as leading toward the mining settlements to the south. This is dangerous, Ayanna said. Too open, too many eyes. She was right. Out here, they were visible for miles. A white man and an Apache woman traveling together. Even from a distance, it would raise questions. Up close, it could mean violence. There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead. Jake said, used it once when I was riding with the Bar J outfit. Might be empty, might not, but there's water there. And walls. Ayanna considered this. And if not empty, then we deal with what we find. He tried to sound more confident than he felt. They approached the line shack cautiously as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was a simple structure of adobe and rough timber, built to shelter cowboys working the far ranges. Smoke rising from the chimney told them it was occupied. Wait here, Jake said, but Ayanna shook her head. We go together or not at all. He wanted to argue, to protect her from whatever reaction their appearance might provoke, but the set of her jaw told him it would be useless. They walked toward the shack side by side, Jake's hand resting on his pistol. The door opened before they reached it, and a grizzled man in his 50s stepped out, rifle in hand but not quite pointed at them. His eyes widened as he took in the unlikely pair. Well, that I'll be damned, the man said. Jake Morrison, ain't it? From the Circle M? Jake recognized him then. Bill Hawkins, a hand who'd worked with his father years back. Mr. Hawkins, didn't expect to find you out here. Hawkins's gaze moved to Ayanna, and his expression hardened. What you doing with a squaw, boy? Your PA know about this? Jake felt Ayanna stiffen beside him. She's with me, he said simply. We need water and a place to rest. We'll be gone come morning. With you, Hawkins repeated slowly. Boy, you lost your mind. You know what folks'll say? I reckon I don't much care what folks say. Hawkins stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Your PA would tan your hide 6 ways from Sunday. My PA ain't here, and the lady needs help. Lady? Hawkins snorted. That what they're calling them now? His grip on the rifle tightened. I ought to run you both off. Hell, you ought to remember who taught you to break horses. Jake interrupted, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. Who gave you work when no one else would take a chance on a drunk? Hawkins's face flushed. That was different. Was it? My PA helped you when you needed it. Now I'm asking the same, just water and a safe place for one night. The standoff stretched between them, tense as a drawn bowstring. Finally. Hawkins lowered his rifle. Your funeral, boy, but she sleeps outside. I won't have no Apache under my roof. Then I sleep outside too, Jake said. Hawkins shook his head in disgust. Fool boy, just like your ma, too soft for your own good. He stomped back inside, slamming the door. Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Beside him, Ayanna stood rigid as stone. I'm sorry, he said. He had no right. He spoke truth, she said quietly. This is what waits for us everywhere. Your people will see betrayer. Mine will see woman who chose shame. There's no place for what we are becoming. What are we becoming? Jake asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Ayanna looked at him, and for a moment her guard dropped completely. He saw fear there, and hope, and something else that made his chest tight. I don't know, she admitted, but already it is too late to turn back. As if to emphasize her words, the door opened again, and Hawkins threw out a canteen and some supplies. That's all you get, and Jake, don't come crying to me when this goes bad. Jake gathered the supplies, his arm brushing against Ayanna's as they walked to find shelter for the night. The touch was electric, sending sparks through him that had nothing to do with static from the storm. They made camp a short distance from the shack, close enough to access water but far enough to avoid further confrontation. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the clear desert sky, Jake built a small fire while Ayanna sat quiet, lost in thought. He was right. You know, she said finally. This will go bad. Your people, my people, they will not understand, will not accept. Then we make our own way, Jake said, surprising himself with his conviction. Find somewhere new, where nobody knows our story. Everywhere has eyes. Everywhere has hate. Maybe. But everywhere also has people who mind their own business, who judge folks by their actions, not their blood. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. My ma used to say the world was changing, becoming something new. Maybe there's room in that new world for us. Ayanna studied him across the flames. When did frightened boy become man with such hope? Jake thought about it, about the long night in the cave, about the moment he decided her life mattered more than others' opinions. Maybe somewhere between yesterday and today. Or maybe I'm still just a frightened boy, hoping brave words make me brave. No, she said softly, not just frightened boy anymore. Something more now. She winced as she shifted position, her injuries making themselves known. You should rest. I'll keep watch. Together, she said. We watch together or not at all. So they sat side by side as the night deepened, not touching but aware of each other's warmth, looking out at the vast darkness and wondering what tomorrow would bring. The fire crackled between them and the future, uncertain but no longer quite so frightening with someone else to face it beside. Dawn came too soon, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. Jake woke to find Ayanna already alert, her face turned toward the sunrise. The morning light revealed what darkness had hidden, the toll of days running. Little food and untreated injuries. Her face was drawn, shadows deep beneath her eyes. We need supplies, Jake said, knowing what that meant. Real food, medicine for your ribs, ammunition. Towns mean danger, Ayanna replied without looking at him. So does starving in the desert. He stood, brushing dust from his clothes. There's a trading post about half a day's ride south. Old McCready runs it. He's different. Trades with everyone. Mexican, Apache, white. Long as your money's good. He don't ask questions. Ayanna finally turned to him. And if he does ask, then we handle it. Jake began breaking camp, such as it was. But we can't keep going like this. You need proper tending, and I'm near out of everything. She rose stiffly, pride keeping her from showing how much the movement cost her. I know plants, roots, can find what we need. Maybe so, but plants won't buy us safe passage or bullets if we need them. He saddled Belle, then turned to her. You're gonna have to ride today. No argument. That trading post is too far for you to walk in your condition. He expected protest, but Ayanna simply nodded. When he helped her mount Belle, she couldn't quite hide her grimace of pain. Jake adjusted the stirrups and handed her the reins, their fingers brushing in the exchange. They set off with Jake walking alongside, one hand on Belle's neck. The morning was still cool, but heat was building on the horizon like a threat. They followed game trails when possible, avoiding the main road but keeping it in sight. Tell me about before, Ayanna said suddenly. Before you became Cowboy. When your mother lived. Jake was surprised by the question, but grateful for the distraction. We had a little place outside Cedar Creek. Nothing fancy, just a cabin and a garden. Ma grew the best tomatoes in the county, used to win ribbons at the fair. He smiled at the memory. She'd sing while she worked, hymns mostly, but sometimes other songs, love songs from when she was young. She loved your father? Fiercely. He was different then, before she died. Could even be tender sometimes. I remember catching them dancing in the kitchen once. No music but what was in their heads. The memory was bittersweet. When she got sick, it was like watching him turn to stone. Each day she got weaker, he got harder. By the time she passed, I hardly recognized him. Ayanna was quiet for a moment. Grief makes people strange. My grandmother say it like skinwalker. Takes shape of person you love, but is something else inside. That's about right. He never hit me or nothing. But the silence was worse than any beating. Like I reminded him too much of what he'd lost. You have her eyes, maybe. Or her way of laughing. Jake glanced up at her, surprised by the observation. How'd you know? There's always something, small thing that brings big pain. She shifted in the saddle, finding a position that hurt less. Yellow Horse's mother, she hate me because I have same way of tilting head as her sister. Sister who marry Mexican trader, brings shame to family. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the desert waking around them. A roadrunner darted across their path, chasing some invisible prey. Hawks circled high above, riding thermals already rising from the heated earth. By midday, they could see the trading post, a squat adobe structure with corrals attached, looking more like a fort than a store. Smoke rose from the chimney despite the heat, and Jake could see horses in the corral. His stomach tightened. We don't have to do this, Ayanna said, reading his hesitation. Yes, we do. He helped her dismount in a cluster of mesquite that offered concealment. Wait here. Let me go in first. See who's about. And if trouble... Jake checked his pistol, ensuring it sat loose in the holster. Then you take Belle and ride. Don't look back. I not leave you. Ayanna? No. Her voice was firm. Together or not at all. You say this to me. Now I say to you. He wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. At least stay with Belle until I signal it's safe. She nodded reluctantly. Jake squared his shoulders and walked toward the trading post, every nerve on edge. The door was heavy wood reinforced with iron, designed to withstand attack. He pushed it open, hinges creaking. Inside was dim and cooler, packed with goods from floor to ceiling. The smell hit him. Leather, spices, gun oil, and something cooking that made his mouth water. Behind the counter stood McCready himself, a bear of a man with graying red hair and arms like tree trunks. Well now, McCready's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Jake Morrison, heard you got yourself lost in Apache country. News travels fast. Faster when there's a reward involved. McCready's eyes glinted with amusement at Jake's alarm. Relax, boy. $50 ain't worth the trouble of hauling you back to Cedar Creek, though your pa's mighty upset, from what I hear. He usually is. Jake glanced around the store, noting two Mexicans playing cards in the corner and a rough-looking American cleaning a rifle by the window. I need supplies. Food, medicine, ammunition. Medicine? McCready's eyebrows rose. You hurt, boy? Not me, my companion. Companion. McCready drew out the word. This companion wouldn't happen to be the Apache woman Bill Hawkins was ranting about last night? Jake's hand drifted to his gun. Hawkins was here. Left at first light, heading back to Cedar Creek with quite a tale. McCready leaned on the counter, studying Jake intently. You know what you're doing, son? I'm trying to keep someone alive, that's all. That ain't all, and we both know it. McCready sighed heavily. But I ain't one to judge. God knows I've made my own unusual choices. He gestured toward the back room where Jake glimpsed a Mexican woman kneading dough. Bring her in. Maria knows healing better than any doctor. How do you... Boy, I've been trading in this desert for 20 years. You think I can't spot someone hiding in the mesquite? He raised his voice. You others clear out. Stores closed for an hour. The card players grumbled but left, followed by the American with the rifle. Jake went to fetch Ayanna, finding her ready to bolt. "It's all right," he said. "McCready's different. Like I said." She allowed him to lead her inside, though her hand never left the knife at her belt. McCready studied her with the same intensity he'd shown Jake. "Apache," he said. "Western band by the beadwork. You're a long way from home, girl." "Have no home," Ayanna replied, chin raised despite everything. "Happens to the best of us." McCready called to his wife in rapid Spanish. Maria emerged, a handsome woman in her 40s who took one look at Ayanna and began issuing orders. "Come," Maria said in accented English. "We fix you proper men outside." "But," Jake started to protest. "Outside," Maria repeated firmly. "This women's work." McCready led Jake out to the porch where they could see for miles in every direction. The older man pulled out a pipe, packing it thoughtfully. "You remind me of myself at your age," he said finally. "Thought I knew better than everyone else. Thought love conquered all." "I never said anything about love." "Didn't have to." McCready lit his pipe, puffing contentedly. "It's written all over you, son. The way you look at her. The way you're willing to risk everything." He shook his head. "It ain't gonna be easy. Most folks won't understand. Hell, most will actively try to stop you. You didn't. I married Maria when such things were even less accepted than now. Lost my family, my position, what they called my good name." He gazed out at the desert. "But I gained something worth more. A real partner. Someone who sees the world different than me but stands beside me anyway." Jake thought about Ayanna's strength, her pride despite everything she'd endured. How do you make it work? Day by day, finding places like this, in between worlds, building something new instead of trying to fit into what exists. McCready studied him. "You prepared for that? To never really belong anywhere?" Before Jake could answer, the door opened. Maria emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "3 ribs cracked, much bruising. I wrap tight, give medicines for pain and healing. She's strong but needs rest. Good food." "She can have it," Jake said quickly. "Whatever she needs." Maria's expression softened. "You good boy? Foolish maybe, but good." She turned to her husband. "They stay tonight. No argument." McCready chuckled. "No argument from me. You heard the boss." Jake wanted to protest. Staying increased the danger of discovery. But when Ayanna emerged, walking easier with her ribs properly wrapped, he couldn't deny she needed the rest. They were given a small room behind the store, clean and simple with 2 narrow beds. Ayanna sat carefully on one, looking uncomfortable with the soft surface after nights on hard ground. "The woman, Maria," she said. "She tell me her story. How they meet when she was captured by Comanche, sold to traders. How he buy her freedom, then court her proper." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "She say white men who choose different are either very brave or very stupid. Which do you think I am?" Ayanna looked at him directly. "Both, is why I trust you." That evening, they ate at Maria's table, beans and rice and cornbread. Simple food that tasted like heaven after days of near nothing. McCready told stories of the old days, when the desert was even wilder, when the rules were what you made them. "There's a place," he said eventually, "south and west of here. Little valley with good water, hidden from main trails. Man could build something there. Raise horses, maybe, or cattle. Far enough from civilization that folks would leave you be." Jake felt hope stir in his chest. "You offering?" "I'm saying I might know of such a place, might even be willing to point the way, for the right kind of people." He winked at Ayanna. "People who understand that different don't mean wrong." Later, lying in the narrow bed, Jake listened to Ayanna's breathing from across the room. Just when he thought she was asleep, her voice came soft in the darkness. "Jake Morrison?" "Yeah? Today, when you face down McCready, not knowing if he friend or enemy, when you stand ready to fight for me." She paused, seeming to search for words. No one ever do that before. Not even my own people. You're worth fighting for, he said simply. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then, the place MacCready speak of. You really think we could make something there? I think we could try. That's all anyone can do. Together, if you're willing. He heard her shift in her bed, maybe turning to face him in the dark. I think maybe I am willing. Think maybe I already choose without knowing it. Jake's heart thundered in his chest. Ayanna, Sleep now, she interrupted gently. Tomorrow we decide. Tonight is enough to know we both willing to try. But sleep was a long time coming for Jake. He lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about the turn his life had taken. A week ago, he'd been just another cowboy trying to prove himself. Now he was planning a future with an Apache woman, ready to leave everything he'd known behind. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, answered by its pack. But tonight, the sound didn't seem lonely. Tonight, it sounded like freedom. The peace of morning shattered with the thunder of hoofbeats. Jake jerked awake, immediately alert, to find MacCready already at the window with his rifle. Riders coming, the big man said grimly. 6, maybe 7, moving fast. Jake was on his feet instantly, strapping on his gun belt. Across the room, Ayanna was already up, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to danger. Despite her injuries, she held her knife ready. Who? Jake asked, joining MacCready at the window. Can't tell yet, but... MacCready squinted, then cursed. That's Bill Hawkins in the lead. Looks like he's brought friends. Jake's stomach dropped. Through the window, he could see the dust cloud approaching, riders pushing their horses hard. As they drew closer, he recognized some faces from Cedar Creek men who'd drink with his father, who'd known him since he was a boy. They're after the bounty, MacCready said. Probably figure bringing you back along with an Apache woman will make them heroes. I won't let them take her, Jake said, checking his Colt. Boy, you're outnumbered 7-1. 8-3, Maria corrected from behind them, holding a shotgun with practiced ease. They want trouble in my house. They get trouble. Ayanna moved beside Jake, close enough he could feel her tension. This my fault. I should go. Lead them away. No. Jake's voice was firm. We face this together. The riders pulled up outside in a cloud of dust. Hawkins dismounted first, his weathered face set in hard lines. The others followed. Jake recognized Tom Bradley, Samuel Mills, even young Pete Morrison, his own distant cousin. Morrison, Hawkins called out. We know you're in there. Come on out, boy. Your PA sent us to bring you home. MacCready opened the door but kept his rifle visible. This is a trading post. Hawkins, not a courthouse. Man's free to trade here without harassment. Step aside, MacCready. This ain't your concern. Hawkins's eyes were cold. Boy's gone savage, taken up with a squaw. His PA wants him back before he shames the family name permanent. Seems to me the boy's old enough to make his own choices, MacCready replied calmly. Not when those choices involve betraying his own kind. This from Tom Bradley, whose brother had been killed in an Apache raid years back. Bad enough he's betting one of them, but word is he's planning to run off with her. Can't allow that. Jake pushed past MacCready onto the porch, Ayanna close behind, despite his gesture for her to stay inside. The mounted men shifted nervously at her appearance, hands drifting to weapons. I'm not going back, Jake said clearly. Tell my PA I'm sorry for disappointing him, but I've made my choice. Choice? Hawkins spat in the dust. You call throwing away your life for a piece of Apache trash a choice? The words hit Jake like physical blows, but it was Ayanna who stepped forward, head high despite the hostile stares. I am Ayanna of the Western Apache, she said in clear English. Daughter of warriors, granddaughter of chiefs. I am not trash. You're whatever we say you are. Bradley snarled, but Jake noticed even he seemed taken aback by her dignity. Pete Morrison, barely 18 himself, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Jake, cousin, think about what you're doing. Your pa's offering to forgive everything if you just come home. Leave the woman. Pretend this never happened. Can't do that. Pete. Jake kept his voice steady, though his heart raced. Man can't pretend away what matters most. She matters most? Hawkins laughed bitterly. Boy, you've lost your mind. She's Apache. Her people killed your neighbors, would kill you without blinking. And our people killed hers. Jake shot back. Where does it end? Hawkins, when do we stop painting each other with the same bloody brush? It ends when they're all dead or on reservations where they belong. Samuel Mills spoke for the first time, his voice flat and final. The tension ratcheted higher. Jake could feel violence building like storm pressure. His hand hovered near his gun, though he knew drawing would mean death. 7 against 3-4 counting Ayanna weren't good odds. Then Ayanna did something unexpected. She stepped fully into the open, away from any cover, and began to speak in Apache. Her voice carried across the space, melodic and strong. The men shifted nervously, not understanding but sensing power in her words. What's she doing? Hawkins demanded. What's she saying? Ayanna switched back to English, her voice carrying clearly. I speak death song, Apache tradition when facing enemies with honor. I tell spirits that I die without shame, that I choose my own path, even to end. She looked directly at each man. I tell them your names, so they know who sends me to other side, so they wait for you there. Pete Morrison went white. Even hardened men like Bradley looked uncomfortable. Apache death curses were legendary, and hearing one spoken with such calm certainty chilled them. She's trying to spook you, Hawkins said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Ayanna continued. I prepare for what comes, but I also speak of Jake Morrison, who shows Apache woman kindness when his people teach only hate. I tell spirits he has honor, that he walks true path even when it leads through fire. She turned to Jake, and her eyes held something that made his breath catch. I tell them he is worth dying beside. Nobody's dying today, Jake said, finding his voice. He stepped forward, placing himself partially in front of Ayanna. You want me, Hawkins? Fine, but you'll have to go through me to get to her, and I promise you'll pay a price you won't like. Boy, you can't outdraw all of us, Mills said. Maybe not, but I can take 2, maybe 3 of you with me. Who wants to be first? Jake's hand rested on his gun butt. Who wants to explain to their family why they died trying to drag a woman to her death? The silence stretched taut. Then McCready spoke from the doorway. Course, that's assuming you get past me and Maria first. We've held off Comanche war parties from this post. You boys don't look near as tough. Pete Morrison was the first to lower his hand from his weapon. This is wrong, he said quietly. Jake's making his own choice. Ain't our place to stop him. Pete! Hawkins turned on the young man furiously. No, I'm done. Pete looked at Jake. Your pa's gonna be furious. Cousin, might never speak to you again. I know, Jake said simply. Pete nodded slowly. For what it's worth, she's beautiful and brave. He turned to Ayanna. Ma'am. He actually touched his hat brim before turning his horse away. Pete, you yellow bastard, Hawkins shouted. But the young man kept riding. The odds had shifted. 6-4 was still bad, but doubt had crept into the remaining men's faces. Bradley kept glancing at Ayanna, who stood straight despite her injuries, ready to die but not to yield. This how you want to be remembered, Tom? Jake asked Bradley directly. As the man who gunned down an unarmed woman because of her blood? Bradley's jaw worked. His brother's death had poisoned him against all Apache, but faced with this specific woman, this specific moment, certainty wavered. She ain't unarmed. She's got that knife. Against 6 guns. Jake let scorn color his voice. That make you feel brave, Tom? That even things up for you? Enough talk, Mills said, hand moving toward his gun. We came to do a job. The shot came from inside the post. Maria had fired her shotgun into the ceiling, the blast deafening in the morning air. She pumped another shell into the chamber with practiced ease. Next one goes lower, she announced calmly. You want to die for $50? Because that's what happens next. You draw those guns. We fill you with lead. Maybe you get some of us, but I promise you bleed for it." The mathematics of violence had shifted. The riders could probably win, but at a cost none wanted to pay. Not for a bounty. Not for a principle that seemed less clear when faced with real blood. Hawkins held for another long moment, then slowly relaxed his gun hand. "This ain't over, Morrison. Your pa's gonna want answers. The whole town's gonna want answers." "Then tell them I found something worth more than their approval," Jake replied. One by one, the riders turned away. Bradley was last, staring at Ayanna with something that might have been respect mixed with his hate. Then he too wheeled his horse and followed the others. Jake stood watching until the dust settled, until he was sure they weren't circling back. Only then did his knees threaten to buckle. Ayanna's hand on his arm steadied him. "You would have died for me," she said softly. "We would have died together." He corrected. McCready cleared his throat. "Well, that was exciting. But they'll be back, boy. With more men, maybe with badges. You can't stay here." "The valley," Jake said. "The place you mentioned. I'll draw you a map, but you need to leave today. Now, really." McCready looked between them. "You sure about this? Last chance to change your mind." Jake looked at Ayanna, saw his own determination reflected in her dark eyes. "We're sure." Maria pressed a packet into Ayanna's hands. "Medicines and herbs. For healing. For later. When babies come." She ignored Ayanna's startled look. "Is always later." Within an hour they were ready. McCready had added supplies to their packs. Refused payment. "Consider it a wedding gift," he'd said with a wink, as they prepared to leave. Ayanna pulled Jake aside. "The words I spoke, the death song, was also marriage song. Same words for Apache, death of old life, birth of new." She looked uncertain. "You should know this." Jake's heart thundered. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying by Apache way, we are bound now. If you accept." Her vulnerability in that moment was devastating. "Do you accept?" Instead of answering with words, Jake pulled her close, mindful of her injuries but needing the contact. She melted against him, and for a moment, the danger, the uncertainty, the whole impossible situation faded away. When they finally mounted Bell together, Ayanna in front this time, Jake's arms around her to hold the reins, McCready called out from the porch, "That valley I mentioned? When you get there, look for the old Apache prayer tree. Still bears fruit after all these years. Seems fitting, don't it?" They rode away as the sun climbed toward noon, two people from different worlds choosing to write a new story together. Behind them lay everything they'd known. Ahead waited uncertainty, danger, and possibly death, but also possibility, also hope, also each other. The desert stretched endlessly before them, harsh and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human prejudice. In that vast space, perhaps there was room for something new, something that hadn't existed before but could, if they were brave enough to create it. Jake felt Ayanna relax against him as they rode, trust replacing wariness. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of sage and strength that was uniquely hers. "No regrets?" he asked. "No regrets," she confirmed. "Only forward now. Forward into the unknown, into a future they would face together." The young cowboy who'd gotten lost in Apache country had found something worth more than his old life, and in choosing love over fear, in standing against the hatred of two peoples, he'd finally become the man he'd always wanted to be. They rode through the heat of the day, following McCready's hand-drawn map toward the hidden valley. The confrontation at the trading post had left them both shaken, but also strangely liberated. There was no going back now, no pretending they could return to their old lives. The choice had been made in blood and witnesses. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose, they stopped to rest Bell and study their surroundings. According to the map, they should reach the valley by tomorrow afternoon if they maintain their pace. "We need to talk about what comes next," Jake said as they shared water from his canteen. "The truth of what we're facing." Ayanna nodded, her expression serious. Your people will not forgive. My people will not forgive. We will be hunted by both. Maybe, but MacCready and Maria made it work. Others must have too. Jake tried to sound more confident than he felt. There's got to be places where folks mind their own business. Mexico, perhaps, but even there, Apache woman and white man draw eyes. She touched her side gingerly where the ribs were still healing. And I cannot travel hard for many days yet. Jake had been thinking the same thing. They needed somewhere to hole up. Let Ayanna heal properly. Make real plans instead of just running. The valley MacCready described might offer that, but it was still unknown territory. There's something else, Ayanna said quietly. The words I spoke at Trading Post. Marriage words. You have not given answer. Jake's heart skipped. In the chaos of their escape, he'd pushed aside the weight of what she'd revealed. When I held you, I thought that was answer enough. Actions can be misread. Words matter too. She looked at him directly, vulnerable but proud. If you need time to think— No, Jake interrupted. I don't need time. I want to do this right. He dismounted and helped her down from Belle, then took both her hands in his. The desert stretched around them, witness to what came next. Ayanna, I don't know Apache customs for this. I don't have a ring or a preacher or any of the things my people say you need. But I know that when those men came for us, my first thought wasn't about saving myself. It was about protecting you. And I know that somewhere between that cave and now, you became the most important thing in my world. Her hands tightened on his. Pretty words. Jake Morrison. True words. I accept your marriage song. I choose you, whatever that means, wherever it leads. He paused, suddenly uncertain. If you'll have a young fool who's still figuring out how to be a man, I already choose, she said softly. When I sang those words, when I stood ready to die beside you, Apache women do not sing marriage song lightly. A small smile touched her lips. And you are not fool. Young still, yes, but fool would have run. You stayed. Jake pulled her close, careful of her injuries. This time their embrace was different, not desperate or uncertain, but claiming. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. So we're married? By Apache law? By Apache way? Yes. Your law might say different. My law stopped mattering when I chose you over them. Jake glanced at the setting sun. We should make camp. Tomorrow we'll reach the valley and start figuring out how to build a life. They found shelter in a cluster of rocks that offered protection from wind and concealment from distant eyes. As Jake tended to Belle and gathered materials for a small fire, Ayanna used the herbs Maria had given her to make a poultice for her ribs. The domestic simplicity of it, working together to create comfort in the wilderness, felt like a promise of what could be. As darkness fell, they sat close by the fire, no longer maintaining the careful distance of strangers. Ayanna leaned against Jake's shoulder, and he marveled at how right it felt. Tell me about your vision for us, she said. This life you see in Hidden Valley. Jake had been thinking about little else as they rode. A small place at first, adobe and timber, like MacCready's post but just for us. Maybe run some horses. Mustangs are good money if you can break them right. Garden for food, though you'll have to teach me what grows out here. Simple life, but our own. Children, the question was barely audible. If we're blessed with them, though I got no idea how to be a father, mine wasn't much for teaching the gentle stuff. Apache fathers teach different than white fathers. Patience, not hardness. Guidance, not commands. She was quiet for a moment. Our children would be both and neither, like us. Stronger for it, maybe, seeing both worlds, choosing the best from each, or torn between, belonging nowhere. The fear in her voice was real. Jake turned to face her fully. Then we teach them that belonging isn't about blood or birthplace. It's about who stands with you, who claims you regardless of what others say. We teach them they belong with us. Always. Tears glinted in Ayanna's eyes. When did you become wise? Jake Morrison? About 5 minutes ago. Don't expect it to last. His attempt at levity made her smile, which had been the goal. They talked deep into the night, sharing dreams and fears with the openness of people who'd already risked everything. Jake learned that Ayanna had always loved horses, had been known in her band for her ability to gentle the wildest ponies. She learned that he'd wanted to be a teacher once, before his mother's death changed everything. "Maybe you teach our children," she suggested. "Reading, writing, numbers. I teach them the old ways, plants, tracking, survival. Together we make them ready for any world." The fire burned low as they planned impossible futures, each vision building on the last. A house with real windows, a corral full of horses. Maybe even neighbors eventually. Other couples who'd chosen love over convention. It was fantasy, perhaps. But fantasy shared made it feel possible. When Jake banked the fire for the night, Ayanna caught his hand. "In Apache way, marriage night is sacred, but with my ribs, we have time," Jake said gently. "All the time in the world, just being here with you, knowing you're mine and I'm yours. That's enough for now." She studied his face in the moonlight. "Young man with old soul, how you become such contradiction? Same way you became an Apache woman who speaks perfect English and chooses a white husband. I guess world's complicated." They lay down on opposite sides of the fire, but close enough to see each other in the dying light. Jake thought sleep would be impossible with so much churning in his mind, but exhaustion claimed him quickly. He woke sometime in the deep night to find Ayanna sitting up, knife in hand. Jake reached for his gun, instantly alert. "What is it?" "Horses, coming from the north." Her voice was barely a whisper. Jake strained to hear, but Ayanna's senses were sharper. Long moments passed before he caught it, the faint sound of hoofbeats, moving steady but not fast. Not pursuit then, but travelers, still dangerous. They quickly doused the remaining embers and moved Belle deeper into the rocks, her dark coat blending with shadows. Then they waited, weapons ready. As the riders drew closer, 3 men passed within 50 yards of their position, close enough for Jake to make out details in the moonlight. Mexican vaqueros by their dress, leading pack mules loaded with goods, legitimate traders or smugglers. Impossible to tell. They passed without stopping, unaware of the hidden couple watching them. Only after the hoofbeats faded completely did Jake and Ayanna relax. "Good ears," he murmured appreciatively. "Staying alive means hearing death before it hears you." She sheathed her knife but remained watchful. "We are too close to traveled routes here. Valley will be better." They didn't try to rebuild the fire, instead huddling together for warmth as the desert night grew cold. It was the first time they'd been this close for so long, and Jake was acutely aware of every point of contact. Ayanna's breathing gradually slowed as she relaxed against him, trusting him to keep watch. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in pale colors, Jake studied the woman in his arms, asleep. She looked younger, the harsh lines of suffering smoothed away. He thought about the unlikely path that had brought them together, a lost cowboy and a cast-out bride, finding in each other what their own peoples couldn't give. "You stare very loud," Ayanna said without opening her eyes. Jake chuckled. "Didn't know staring made noise. Everything makes noise if you listen, right?" She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "What you see when you stare?" "My wife," he said simply, still getting used to that word. Strange word in English. Wife. In Apache, the word means one who stands with me. Better meaning, I think. Then that's what you are, the one who stands with me. She reached up to touch his face, fingers gentle on stubbled cheek. "And you are one who stands with me, even when whole world says you should not." They broke camp as the sun rose, eager to reach the promised valley. The landscape began to change as they rode, becoming more varied, with hidden canyons and secret springs. Life was more abundant here, away from the main traveled routes. By midday, following McCready's careful directions, they found the entrance to the valley. It was hidden by a natural fold in the land, invisible until you were almost upon it. A narrow trail led between high rocks, barely wide enough for a horse. "Good defense," Ayanna observed approvingly. "Hard to find, easy to guard." They moved through the passage slowly, Jake leading Belle while Ayanna rode. The trail opened suddenly into a hidden paradise, a valley perhaps 2 miles long and half as wide, surrounded by protective cliffs. A stream ran through the center, feeding cottonwoods and willows. Grass grew thick and green, and Jake could see game trails leading to the water. "Look," Ayanna breathed, pointing. There, near the far end of the valley, stood a massive cottonwood, its trunk gnarled with age. From its branches hung strips of faded cloth and beads, prayer offerings left by Apache hands over countless years. The prayer tree. Jake said, McCready was right. They made their way to the ancient tree, both feeling the weight of its presence. This was sacred ground, a place where Ayanna's people had come for generations to leave prayers and seek visions. "Is it wrong for us to be here?" Jake asked, suddenly uncertain. Ayanna dismounted, moving to the tree with reverence. She touched the trunk gently, whispered words in Apache, then turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "My grandmother told stories of this place, where women came to pray for children, for good marriages, for healing. She said the spirits here judge not by blood but by heart." She held out her hand to Jake. "Come, we ask blessing together." Jake took her hand, letting her lead him to the tree, following her whispered instructions. He helped her tie a strip of cloth from her dress to a branch, their hands working together to secure it among the other offerings. "What did we ask for?" he said when they finished. "For strength, for wisdom, for children who will know both worlds without being torn by either." She leaned against him. "For courage to build something new." Standing there beneath the prayer tree, in a valley hidden from the world's judgment, Jake felt something shift inside him. The boy who'd ridden out from Cedar Creek was gone. In his place stood a man who'd chosen his path and the woman who would walk it beside him. "So, this is home," he said, looking around the valley with new eyes. "This is beginning," Ayanna corrected. "Home is what we build together." Jake kissed her then, there in the shadow of the prayer tree, sealing promises made and futures imagined. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "Come," Ayanna said. "Much work before nightfall. Must find shelter, make safe camp. Tomorrow we start building. Tonight," she smiled shyly. "Tonight we truly become one." They set about the practical work of survival, but their hearts were already building more than shelter. They were building a life, a future, a love that transcended the boundaries others had drawn. And in that hidden valley, witnessed by ancient trees and endless sky, it seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The morning sun crept across the valley floor, painting their small camp in golden light. They had been here 3 days now, long enough to find the best site for building, to map the water sources, to begin imagining the shape their life would take in this hidden sanctuary. Jake woke to find Ayanna already up, standing at the edge of their camp with her face turned toward the rising sun. She was singing softly in Apache, a morning prayer he'd learned to love. Her ribs were healing well, the bruises fading from purple to yellow. Each day she moved with more of her natural grace. "No sign of riders?" he asked, joining her. "Only deer coming to water, 2 does and fawn." She turned to him, and the morning light caught the warmth in her eyes. "This place has good spirits. Jake, they accept us." Over the past days, they'd worked side by side to establish their camp. Jake had been surprised by Ayanna's knowledge. She could read the land like a book, knowing where to find clay for building, which plants were edible, where game trails crossed. Under her guidance, he was learning to see the desert not as enemy, but as provider. "Today we start the real work," Jake said, looking at the level ground they'd chosen for their home. "Adobe bricks first. McCready said there's good clay by the stream bend." "I know adobe building." Ayanna said, "My mother's people. We build summer houses this way. I teach you." They worked through the morning, mixing clay and straw, forming bricks to dry in the sun. It was hard work, but there was joy in it, in building something together, in watching their dream take physical form. Jake found himself stealing glances at Ayanna as she worked. marveling at how natural this felt despite everything that said it shouldn't. "You smile like fool," she observed, not looking up from the brick mold. "Happy fool," he corrected. "Never thought I'd be building a house with my wife." The words still sent a thrill through both of them. 3 nights ago, beneath the vast desert stars, they had completed their union in the way of both peoples, promises spoken, bodies joined, souls intertwined. Jake would carry the memory forever, Ayanna's face in moonlight, the way she'd whispered his name like a prayer, the feeling of coming home to someone who saw all of him and chose to stay. "House is just beginning," Ayanna said, but she was smiling too. "Wait until I make you dig irrigation ditches for garden." By afternoon, they had rows of adobe bricks drying in the sun. Jake's back ached and his hands were raw, but satisfaction warmed him better than any fire. They sat in the shade of the prayer tree, sharing water and planning. 3 rooms to start, Jake said. "Sketching in the dirt with a stick. Main room for cooking and living, sleeping room, storage room. We can add more when children come." Ayanna finished firmly. "No, if. I dreamed it last night, small girl with your eyes and my stubbornness." "Lord help us," Jake laughed. "That's a dangerous combination." They were still planning when Belle's whinny alerted them. The mare's ears were pricked forward, focused on the valley entrance. Jake was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun. "Stay here," he said, but Ayanna was already beside him, knife ready. A lone rider emerged from the hidden trail, moving slowly with hands visible. As he drew closer, Jake recognized him with shock. Pete Morrison, his cousin who'd ridden away from the confrontation at McCready's. "Jake," Pete called out. "It's just me. I come in peace." Jake stepped into view, gun drawn, but not aimed. "Pete, you alone?" "I am." Pete dismounted at a respectful distance, keeping his hands away from his weapons. "Been riding for 2 days trying to find you. McCready finally told me where you'd gone, said you might need this." He pulled a leather satchel from his saddlebags and tossed it to Jake. Inside was money, more than Jake had ever seen at once. "What is this?" "Your inheritance, from your ma's side. Been sitting in the bank since she died, waiting for you to turn 21. Pete's expression was complicated. "Your PA never told you about it. Figured he'd keep it from spite after you left. So I withdrew it. Told them I had written permission. Bank believed me since we're kin." Jake stared at the money, speechless. It was enough to buy supplies, tools, livestock, everything they needed to build a real life here. "Why?" he finally managed. Pete looked past him to where Ayanna stood proud and watchful. "Because what I saw at McCready's wasn't wrong, just different. Because love shouldn't be a crime. Because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "Because maybe if more folks chose love over hate, my brother might still be alive." It was Ayanna who stepped forward then, moving with quiet dignity. "Your brother, he died in raid. 3 years back. Caught in a fight that started over stolen horses, escalated to killing." Pete met her eyes directly. "I hated all Apache after that. Then I saw you ready to die rather than be separated from Jake, and I realized you're just people. People who love and grieve same as us. I grieve with you for your brother," Ayanna said formally. "May his spirit find peace." Pete's eyes misted. "Thank you. That means something. Coming from you." They invited Pete to stay the night, and he accepted gratefully. Around the campfire, he shared news from the outside world. Jake's father had disowned him publicly, but was drinking more heavily than ever. The town was divided. Some calling Jake a traitor, others quietly suggesting maybe it was his business who he married. "There's something else," Pete said as the fire burned low. "Army's increasing patrols, looking for renegade Apache. Word is they're planning to force all bands onto reservations within the year. They hear about an Apache woman living free with a white man." He didn't finish the threat. "We know the danger," Jake said quietly, "but we're not going to live in fear. Valley is hidden," Ayanna added, "and we stay alert." Pete left at first light, promising to return in a few months with supplies they couldn't make themselves. "You've got family still," he told Jake at parting. "Even if it's just me." After he'd gone, Jake and Ayanna stood together watching the dust settle. The money Pete had brought changed everything. They could build properly now, create something lasting. "We need to go to a town." Jake said, "Get tools, supplies, window glass if we can find it, seeds for planting. Together, though it won't be easy. People will stare, maybe worse." Ayanna lifted her chin in the gesture he'd come to love. "Let them stare. We face them as what we are, husband and wife building a life." They made the journey to the nearest trading town 3 days later. As expected, their appearance caused a sensation. Jake kept his hand near his gun, while Ayanna walked beside him with quiet dignity, ignoring the whispers and hostile looks. The general store owner, a German immigrant named Muller, was the only one who treated them with courtesy. "Money is money," he said with a shrug when Jake thanked him. "And love is love. In old country. My parents were Catholic and Protestant, also forbidden. I understand." They loaded Belle and a newly purchased pack mule with everything needed to start their homestead. Tools, nails, seeds, fabric, even a small glass window for their future home. As they prepared to leave, Muller pressed a small package into Ayanna's hands. "Wedding gift," he said gruffly. "Every woman needs something beautiful." Inside was a small mirror in a carved wooden frame. Ayanna's eyes filled with tears as she thanked him in carefully pronounced German, surprising everyone. The journey back to the valley was tense but uneventful. Only when they passed through the hidden entrance did Jake feel the weight lift from his shoulders. This was home now, their sanctuary from the world's judgment. Over the following weeks, their adobe house rose from the ground brick by brick. Jake learned to mix mud plaster under Ayanna's guidance, while she mastered using the tools Pete's money had bought. They worked from dawn to dusk, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied each night. The day they installed the window, Ayanna stood before it in wonder. "Glass in the desert," she murmured. "My grandmother would not believe." "Wait until you see the garden we're going to grow," Jake said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Tomatoes like my mother grew, corn and squash like your people plant. Best of both worlds." As summer gave way to early fall, their small house was complete. 3 rooms as planned, with a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings. They dug irrigation channels from the stream, planted their first seeds, even built a small corral for Belle and the mule. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the cliffs in brilliant colors, Ayanna took Jake's hand and placed it on her stomach. "The dream was true," she said softly. "Spring will bring more than growing plants." Jake's heart stopped, then raced. "You're sure?" "Woman knows. Apache woman especially knows." She smiled at his expression. "You are happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He pulled her close, careful as always, but now with new reason. "A baby. Our baby. First of many, if spirits are kind." She leaned into his embrace. Strong children for a new world. Children who will know that love is stronger than hate. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, they sat together on their hand-built porch, planning again. Names were debated, additions to the house discussed, dreams expanded to include a new generation. The prayer tree stood sentinel at the valley's end, its ancient branches holding their cloth offering among dozens of others. Jake thought about the journey that had brought them here. A frightened boy lost in a storm, an Apache woman fleeing abuse and abandonment. Neither could have imagined that night in the cave would lead to this, a home built by their own hands, a love that defied 2 people's expectations, a child growing beneath Ayanna's heart. "No regrets?" he asked, as he had that day at McCready's. "Only one," Ayanna said, and his heart clenched until she continued. "I regret we did not meet sooner. Think of all the days we could have had together already." Jake kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of sage and home. "We have all the days ahead. That's enough. More than enough." In the distance, coyotes began their evening song. But tonight, as every night now, the sound didn't seem lonely. It seemed like celebration, like the desert itself was singing for two people brave enough to choose love over fear, brave enough to build something new in a world that said it couldn't exist. The young cowboy who'd been trapped with an Apache bride had indeed become a man that night. But more than that, he'd become a husband, would soon be a father, and had found the courage to create a life outside the boundaries others had drawn. And in that hidden valley, protected by ancient cliffs and blessed by sacred trees, their love would grow like the gardens they tended, proof that different roots could intertwine to create something beautiful and strong. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through the Wild West. We hope Jake and Ayana's story touched your heart as much as it touched ours. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let us know. We love connecting with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering prejudice in the American frontier, please subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share your thoughts about Jake and Ayana's journey. Your comments and stories mean everything to us. Until next time, partners.